Hello and welcome to Dialogue. Former U.S. President Donald Trump has claimed victory of what is said to be the most consequential general election in the U.S. history. What does a Trump win say about the mindset of U.S. voters today? How will a second Trump administration conduct its relationship with other countries? And what can the next U.S. president do to bring together a country marked by its most bitter political division in modern history? Join us for our discussion today, live from Beijing. I'm Xu Qinduo. Joining me today are Anthony Moretti, Associate Professor from Robert Morris University, Peter Kuznick, Professor of Department of History at American University, Brandon Andrews, entrepreneur and former Hill staffer, and Tom Pauken II, author of U.S. versus China, From Trade Wars to Reciprocal Deal. Welcome to Dialogue. So, Peter, I will start with you. Yes, your response to the election obviously is not yet completely, but I think it's pretty clear Trump has won.
I have to admit that I was flabbergasted. I did not think the American people would want to go back to the chaos, the bitterness, the divisiveness of the Trump presidency from 2016 to 2020. But as Zhou and Lai mentioned many years ago, one of the charming things about the American people is that they have absolutely no historical memory. And so Trump was able to weave a story about prosperity and calmness and peace during his time in office and contrast that with the Biden administration. You know, the Biden administration was very unpopular. And if we look at Biden's ratings throughout his presidency, they were historically low in many respects. But the Democrats didn't take that into consideration. So Biden would have been much better off had he said after one term, I'm going to have one successful term, then I'm going to turn this over to a younger person. But he clung to power. And by the time he finally agreed, after that disastrous debate, to hand over, it was too late for a primary, and he anointed Kamala Harris. Had there been a primary, the Democrats might have been able to choose a more effective candidate and also to figure out what the voters wanted. So this idea, we're not going back, did not resonate because many Americans wanted to go back because they were very upset about the economy, about immigration, about the direction the country was going. And the Democrats didn't hear that.
Mm-hmm. Tom, I assume you think differently, obviously. I mean, your response, are you surprised with the result?
Not at all. Of course, obviously, many people ask me, and I also do quite a bit of consulting on geopolitics and forecasting. So, yes, I have been predicting Trump's victory, but obviously I'm a Republican voter and a Trump supporter. So people kind of expected that. But I did some deep dive research and analysis the past few months, and I tried to be as neutral as I possibly could. And I just came to the conclusion that Trump's going to win. The main problem with the Democrat Party right now is it's no longer the Democrat Party that it was, say, 20 or 30 years ago. That was a pro-peace party. That was the anti-big business party. That was against, a lot of wars. And they were endorsed by the Cheney family. And then Harris has taken the Cheney family on the campaign, boasting about it. This is outrageous. Obviously, this is why RFK Jr. endorsed Trump. And these were the kind of Democrats that if I was a Democrat, I would have been a Kennedy Democrat.
Brandon, what do you think are the top issues in the heart of American voters? I think Peter and both Tom and Peter mentioned a few, like a war, a Ukraine war, U.S. support of Ukraine war, and the economy. And also, you wonder, there's a saying in the U.S. politics, stupid is economy. Does that still, a thing for the voters? Is it about race, about education? What are the major factors here at play?
100% it's about the economy. Yes, there are a number of other issues, whether that be immigration, whether that be national security, education, etc. But if you can't put food on your table, If you're looking at the price of eggs, in some places 160% more today than they cost when President Biden took office, it has to be the economy that was really animating the movement around the country. And President Trump was able to make the case that during his presidency, you were better off. In fact, if you look at some of the battleground states, you look at Pennsylvania, you look at Michigan, 60% or more of respondents, when asked, hey, was the economy better today than it was 4 years ago? They said no, and even more so in some other battleground states. So the economy definitely the top issue. But if you look at some of the other issues, immigration, Vice President Harris never really gave a clear answer on the early executive action that the Biden administration took on immigration, action that a lot of people connect to exacerbating problems at the border over the past few years. She never really gave a clear answer on the inflation question and never owned up to the economic stimulus that the Biden administration pushed forward, understandably so because of the economic crisis. But she never really owned the fact that that was something that had to be done, but that she might have a plan moving forward. And of course, a few weeks ago, she was on a national TV interview and said, I can't think of one single thing that I would do differently than President Biden. As unpopular as President Biden was, that answer, I think, really impacted her campaign. And obviously, she wasn't able to recover.
Well, Anthony, what do you think are the factors leading to, let's say, the loss of Harris? You know, some say there's not enough time for her to prepare, or for the Democratic Party to choose a better candidate. She's
I think
enjoyed the
everything that's
support
been
of
said,
the stars, the business people, former presidents, endorsement for the Nobel laureates. You think there's momentum, strong momentum for her to win?
logic says there was strong momentum. And, I think that there are 2 points that have been made, and maybe one more that should be amplified. The anxiety in the country right now is one that is palpable, whether it's based on concerns about the economy, whether it's based on concerns about immigration, whether it's based on culture issues, whatever it might be. There's a general sense that it's a divided nation, and the anticipation of Democrats was that Kamala Harris was going to be able to be a unifier in some way. Well, she wasn't, and I agree that I think one of the critical factors was because she really wasn't tested in a primary. And keep in mind, she was a candidate in 2020 and spiked for about a minute and then crashed relatively quickly after one political debate. So I think one of the questions the Democrats are going to have to answer going forward is, what made you think she'd be a better campaigner in 2024 than she would have been in 2020? And then on top of that, yes, I think all of that glitz and all of those fancy names and celebrities, I think a lot of people in middle America looked and went, so what? Those people aren't putting food on my table. They're not making my kids safer when he or she goes to school. And so I think this sense of the flair and the substance and the style, or the flair and the style rather, didn't match the substance. And I think enough voters looked at it and went, nope, I can't take that risk.
What about this factor? I think there are people, public figures, they would say they are not really for Harris, but probably they are more against Trump. So in that sense, they would vote for Harris. Whatever Trump says or does, they say Trump is not the one. Is that a factor strong enough, or not strong enough, obviously, to save Harris here?
I don't think there's any doubt about it. I come back to the idea of, who ultimately influences how you vote. And generally speaking, a high profile celebrity in a majority of cases is not going to resonate well. You're going to look as close to your dinner table as you possibly can. You're going to look down the hall and make sure your kid is safe. You're going to look at your own job security. You're going to look at your spouse if you're married or in a relationship with someone. And you're going to ask yourself, are we better off today? And I think a majority of Americans going into this election believed that it was going to be close. I think some of the shock this morning is here in the U.S. is not only that Trump won, but how easily he won in terms of how you look at the electoral college. And remember, in the United States right now, to win a so-called swing state by 4 or 5 percentage points is the equivalent of a blowout. Because these are races that are supposed to be as tight as possibly can be, and he had at least in my impression, a unexpected strong success, especially in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. He's likely to win Michigan as well.
Peter, given what we have talked about, obviously, despite all the strong endorsement, Harris lost the election. So does that to say, probably somehow the political figures, Harris, Biden, and all those supporters, they are some out of touch with the reality, with the people? And the people care about the economy, care about the price, but somehow they are campaigning probably on different things?
I think the Democrats clearly were out of touch with most Americans, especially Americans in the heartland. She did fairly well on the coasts and in some of the traditional Democratic strongholds, but in others, she really did not do well. And the point that was made before about her failing to come up with a more thoughtful answer about how she's going to differentiate herself from Biden, that really was a point at which I was afraid that her campaign was sunk, because the American people wanted change. And the issue was who's going to position themselves as the candidate of change. Kamala could have come in and done that, but she failed. She failed to differentiate herself on the question of Gaza. I know with young Americans, with my students, that was a burning issue. They hated seeing what was going on every day in Gaza, whether they considered it genocide or not. They still hated to see it. And she did not in any way really separate herself from Biden on that. And her answers on the economy and immigration tended to be vague. She did not. That's why people kept saying, I don't know her. I don't know what her policies are. I don't know what she stands for. And she did make some of that clear. I don't want to put it all on her as a candidate, but the Democratic Party as a party has become very corporate. And as Tom said, the Democrats used to be the party of peace. They used to be the anti-war party. But they've now it's morphed into the war party. And the fact that they could celebrate so openly Liz Cheney and Dick Cheney, who they vilified just a few years ago, shows that they were willing to embrace anybody, but not to listen to what the American people were saying about the things that they felt really mattered to them.
Well, Tom, of course, there are factors leading to the loss of Harris. What other factor do you see as a major playing a major role for the victory of Donald Trump? What kind of message do you think that has struck a chord with American people?
Many people talk to me, and when they talk about Trump, even the ones who are the Trump haters, a lot of times they were referencing when Trump was almost assassinated and he only got hit by the ear. It was like they were just, wow. And he just went back on the campaign trail the next day. But then the media tried to ignore it. They tried to make it like it was no big deal because it was so obvious that the bias was there. But that kind of bias was so heartless, so ruthless, that I believe it really turned off a lot of the independent voters and people who are probably anti-Trump, but they're like, wow, this kind of bias where they want him dead, that's scary. So I think that was a major turning point. Also, Harris stumbled, which hasn't been mentioned before, but I'm going to say it. She picked Tim Walz as her running mate. I think she should have picked either Shapiro or maybe the Senator Kelly from Arizona, and she would have had a much better chance. I don't know why she picked Tim Walz. I had some people come up to me and said, well, maybe Tim Walz is this folksy guy. No, he's a leftist, and Minneapolis was burnt down during the riots. This guy is not a folksy person. He's not a folksy governor. So the fact is she made serious mistake on Walz, obviously not addressing the economic issues. And I'm glad that there was some awareness of that now, because the facts of the matter is that when I visited the U.S. last summer to take my family on vacation, I was shocked by how awful the economic conditions are in the U.S. and how terrible inflation was. It's crazy. And how are people going to survive? And then you see all the homeless people around and all the crimes, but the mainstream media is talking about the stock markets and how banks are making big time profits, and then how their major donors are sending lots of money to the Democrat Party and to Harris campaign. There is a total disconnect, and I think it really turned off many voters who were probably, I don't like Trump, but no way I'm going to go with the Democrats this time around.
Well, Tom, how do you describe the Trump supporter or regular Trump supporter? And if you look at the polls, some would say, those who are without a college education tend to vote, more likely with Trump, and those new voters also, Trump enjoys a lead among those group of people, and men too, right?
Sure, yeah, but it's not a sexist thing, and this is why the strong women don't. Trump doesn't like strong women really offended us, because Trump is surrounded by strong women. Melania is a very strong woman. I know some people who are very familiar with the Trump family, and Melania is a strong woman, and she's a good wife for Donald Trump. So when they were suggesting that Trump, that these are the kind of things that these stereotypes that Trump are Nazis, are garbage. It's outrageous. You're treating us like garbage as inhuman. We are human beings like the rest of you. I'm listening to you guys. I know you guys don't love Trump, but you know what? You're saying some smart things. And I think if we had conversations together and outside this extreme polarization, I think we could have beer together and have great chats. But the problem in the polarized world right now is, like, literally, I get scared if I meet somebody and he says he's a Democrat. I don't know what to do. I mean, because a lot of times when I have met Democrats, they get so angry, they start shouting and screaming and then just say all these horrible things about Trump. And it's like, I don't know. So I get nervous myself. If we can have more reasonable discussions, I really believe the Democrat Party will rebound. This is actually very important. This is actually something I see as a positive for the Democrat Party, because they can turn against what went wrong with the Democrat Party for the past few years and become the party that they used to be. Okay? Although I'm a Republican and a Trump supporter, I support a strong two-party system. I want the Democrat Party to be great again, actually. I want them to be pro-peace. I want them to be pro-labor and fighting big business.
Well, with that in mind, Brandon, let's say a strong system as usual as it is. But do you think that Trump, as a president, is he able to unite the country, which is deeply divided, as we discussed?
Well, in his speech yesterday evening or early this morning in Florida, he uttered some words that I think would surprise a lot of people. He says the country needs to be healed and that he wants to heal the country. Now, you contrast that with a lot of very aggressive and even potentially violent language that's been used during the campaign by him to, maybe balance it out. But hopefully he wants to take that track moving forward to heal the country. He hasn't committed to having a Democrat in his cabinet or to bring in Dems when it comes to presidential appointees, but I think those steps would go a long way to heal the country and to show that we don't have to move forward divided, but we can move forward together. But also, I think President Trump, it's really incumbent upon him to either walk back or move in a different direction from a lot of the aggressive language that he's used, and incumbent upon folks around him and Republicans around him to make sure that some of those, I believe, more dangerous words and promises don't actually come to fruition. So yes, there's some division, and yes, there's some concern, but I think given his statements, maybe some would say those are well-founded concerns, but very encouraging to hear him say we need to unify, we need to heal in his speech, and hopefully that's what we'll have moving forward.
Well, briefly, Brandon, what will happen to himself? Think about these lawsuits against him, besides the challenges domestically.
Yeah. Basically, those things are going to go away, at least for the time that he's in office. There's a small chance that some of those pieces could come back in a personal way after he leaves office, but pretty unlikely that 4 years from now, those things, that there's going to be the will, political will or otherwise, to move forward with those. So for the time being, those things are behind him, and he's going to be able to focus on being president of the United States and moving his policy agenda forward.
Well, Anthony, let's take a look at the U.S. Foreign policy under the second term of President Trump. Some observers say, the European Union is trembling, with the news that Trump wins the election. Obviously, people around the world are watching, the results. So will his policy be different from his first term?
I think if you look at any president and compare to him or her as a presidential candidate, one of the things you say is, will the actions match the rhetoric? And in many cases, the answer is no. And in Trump's case, in many cases, the answer is yes. And what I mean by that is, if he tells you he's going to do X, for the most part, he does X. Now, he may temper it with a little bit of caution. He may put, look, we're going to make it happen on this date instead of right now. But nevertheless, I think the European Union is going to be asking a couple of questions, especially relating to, do you still see us as critical allies? I think if you look to Asia, one of the questions is going to be, will he try to be combative with China, and similarly, will he continue whatever outreach efforts he was making with other nations in that part of the world? Latin America and Africa, for the most part, those weren't high agenda items in his first term. Presumption is they won't be as high agenda in the second term, with the possible exception of having to deal with Central and South America regarding the questions of immigration and the economies of those countries as well. So I suspect what you're looking at is a man who is probably going to say to Central and South America, let's find ways to strengthen your economies. I think he's going to look at Europe and say, look, the relationship is there, but there are some critical questions we've got to ask. And then in Asia might be a little bit more of a wild card, because he tends to see Asia perhaps as the place where the big deal can be made. And he might be able to pull one off, especially in a second term where perhaps he has even more credibility as president than he might have when he was in office from 2017 to 2021.
Well, Tom, to you, of course, President Trump, in his speech, he talked about there was no war, no new wars during his first term. And then he said he will keep his promise. So are we going to see the end of the Ukraine war?
Oh, yeah, definitely. First of all, Ukraine was already losing. I think the only reason they're still fighting right now is because Biden and the Democrat Party was afraid for another war loss before November 5th. So I think Ukraine side already is tired. Their people are tired of fighting. If they keep fighting, they're just going to keep losing more land. So what you're going to see is Trump probably talk to Zelensky, also to Putin, and try to negotiate some type of fair and hopefully reasonable ceasefire agreement. Obviously, Ukraine is going to lose some land, and Trump is going to be very upfront about that. But the facts is that it's better to lose some land than all your land. Okay, it's just life.
Well,
they're losing to Russia.
Right. If you look at the election, obviously the Republicans will also control the Senate and the Congress with the presidency. So can we say there will be less support, financial aid to Ukraine, to the European countries?
Obviously, yes. And the war's got to end. There's too many people dying, okay, in Ukraine. They're soldiers. And now, in order for them to recruit soldiers, they got to go to the nightclubs and drag them out of there and beat up these poor Ukrainian men and then throw them out, throwing them into paddy wagons and then sending them out to the battlefields to go get shot and killed.
Yeah.
This is what's happening in Ukraine right now.
Right. Well, let's shift a little bit of attention to Asia. Peter, I mean, of course, China-U.S. relationship is one of arguably the most important one. And Trump talked about imposing 60% extra tariff on Chinese imports. People also talked about, U.S. trade deficit with Vietnam. He would do something about that too. So we are going to see more intensifying a trade war with Asian countries.
I think that's certainly going to be happening. Trump has said he's going to dramatically increase tariffs on Chinese goods. Doesn't want essential Chinese goods that are necessary for American national security to be in the supply line. So I think that's going to be the start. We saw the trade wars begin during his first term in office. But beyond that, you have to remember the role that Trump played with Taiwan. He was the first American president in decades to meet with the president of Taiwan. He dramatically increased arms sales to Taiwan. Before that, Taiwan was not that big an issue. There was not that much tension over Taiwan, but Trump ramped it up. And so what we've seen under Biden is a general broad militarization of the Pacific. And we've seen American generals like Minihan say he thinks the U.S. and China will be at war by 2025. I think that the tendency toward hostility with China is probably going to increase under Trump. And I agree with what Tom was saying about Ukraine. I think if either candidate, regardless of which one got elected, Ukraine is pretty much finished because of the facts on the ground. I mean, the Ukrainians cannot sustain this. And so we're going to likely see a peace deal. But the area that concerns me most immediately is with Israel and its enemies in the region, because Trump not only criticized Harris for her own mild criticism of Netanyahu and the Israeli policy, but he said that Israel should take out Iran's nuclear facilities. Had Israel done that, then all hell would have broken loose in the region, not only a broad regional war, but possibly beyond the Middle East as well. So I think that, and Trump was remembered, did move the embassy to Jerusalem. He's been very, very insensitive to the concerns of the Palestinians. So I see that situation as very inflammatory and even more dangerous.
Can we say more, okay, you use the word more dangerous, and I'll ask you briefly, Brandon, so more uncertainty, probably more challenge around the world?
Well, I think there'll be more certainty in terms of President Trump's actions. He does very often do what he says, but also some concerns for American entrepreneurs. You know, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a small business owner, and the National Federation of Independent Businesses has surveyed regularly, and inflation is the top concern for American small business owners. If you do an across-the-board tariff, especially on goods from China, those costs are going to have to be incurred by small business owners, and small businesses don't have the same kind of wiggle room that large businesses do to be able to eat those costs, and so they're going to have to pass them on to consumers.
Brandon,
and so
we have to stop there. Well, with that, we come to the end for today's show. Many thanks to our guests. You can also find us on the CGTN app on YouTube. I'm Xu Qinduo. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.